The baobab tree stood sentinel in the pre-dawn darkness, its ancient trunk scarred by centuries of harmattan winds and the whispered secrets of ancestors. Captain Ibrahim Traoré pressed his palm against its bark, feeling the pulse of generations who had sought shelter beneath its sprawling canopy. The tree remembered everything: the caravans that once passed carrying salt and gold, the colonial administrators who had carved their initials into its flesh, and now, this moment that would reshape the destiny of a continent. "Ancestors, guide my tongue tonight," he whispered in more, his breath visible in the cool air. "Let the words I speak honor those who came before and protect those who will come after." The meeting place, a compound on the outskirts of Ouagadougou where his grandmother once ground millet and told stories of resistance, had been chosen with deliberate care. Here, where the red earth still held the footprints of freedom fighters, 5 men would gather to discuss what the world's intelligence agencies had only begun to suspect: a plan that would end Africa's economic colonization forever. Ibrahim's phone buzzed once, then twice. The coded signal meant his guests had arrived safely, evading the satellite surveillance that had tracked every movement of consequence across the Sahel for decades. He straightened his military fatigues, checked the traditional leather pouch his grandmother had given him, containing earth from Burkina Faso soil and a cowrie shell from Ghana's coast, and walked toward the compound. The first figure to emerge from the shadows was Assimi Goïta, Mali's interim leader, his movements still bearing the measured precision of a paratrooper. Behind him came Abdourahmane Tidiane from Niger, his weathered face carrying the weight of 1,000 desert campaigns. Julius Malema appeared next, the South African revolutionary whose rhetoric had set parliament chambers ablaze from Cape Town to Cairo. And finally, stepping into the circle of solar-powered lanterns with the quiet authority of someone who had spent years in the mineral-rich shadows of diplomacy, came a man whose name would never appear in the official records: the coordinator. Barka da Zuwa. Ibrahim greeted them in Hausa, the language of trade and trust across West Africa. "Welcome, brothers." They settled onto locally woven mats arranged in a circle, just as their grandfathers had done when decisions of consequence required the wisdom of collective counsel. No smartphones recorded their words. No stenographers captured their agreements. Only the baobab tree bore witness, its leaves rustling with what sounded almost like approval. The coordinator spoke first, his voice carrying the cultivated accent of European universities but weighted with the authority of someone who had spent decades moving between the marble halls of international finance and the red dirt reality of African extraction. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to share will sound like the dreams of revolutionaries or the fever dreams of madmen, depending on your perspective. For the past 18 months, a consortium of institutions, some governmental, some private, all bound by a common understanding that Africa's current trajectory serves no one's long-term interests, has been developing what we call Project Renaissance." Malema leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Fancy names for fancy plans. Speak plainly, brother. What are you proposing?" "The complete financial independence of Africa within 7 years," the coordinator replied. "Not reform. Not negotiation. Independence." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. Ibrahim felt his grandmother's cowrie shell warm against his chest. In the old stories she used to tell, cowrie shells were the currency of kings before Europeans brought paper promises and digital debt. Now, sitting under stars that had watched empires rise and fall, he wondered if they were about to restore something that had been stolen, or create something entirely new. How? Tiani's question cut through the night air like a blade. The coordinator reached into a waterproof case and withdrew a tablet, its screen casting blue light across faces marked by years of struggle and strategy. 3 pillars. First, the African Continental Payment System, not the incremental trade facilitation currently being discussed, but a complete monetary infrastructure that bypasses SWIFT, bypasses the dollar, bypasses every choke point that has kept our continent's wealth flowing outward for centuries. He swiped to reveal a map of Africa dotted with interconnected nodes. Every central bank from Lagos to Lusaka is already equipped with quantum-encrypted technology. They think they're testing routine software updates. What they're actually doing is preparing for the day we flip the switch and Africa conducts all intracontinental trade in a new digital currency backed by our combined mineral reserves. Goïta studied the screen, his expression unreadable. And the second pillar? Resource sovereignty. Every mine, every oil field, every lithium deposit currently controlled by foreign entities will be nationalized simultaneously. Not country by country where they can isolate and punish individual nations, but all at once, coordinated to the minute. The legal framework has already been prepared, ghost legislation sitting in parliamentary computers, ready to be activated. They'll send in their armies, Malema observed, but his tone suggested he was calculating rather than objecting. Which brings us to the third pillar, the coordinator continued. Defense integration. Not the piecemeal security agreements we have now, but a unified continental defense force with shared intelligence, shared logistics, and shared nuclear deterrent. Ibrahim's breath caught. Nuclear deterrent? South Africa never fully dismantled its nuclear program. They simply made it appear dormant. Ghana's new research reactor can be repurposed within 6 months. Nigeria's uranium reserves, Libya's plutonium stores, Sudan's heavy water facilities, all the pieces are already in place. We're not talking about building a nuclear program, we're talking about revealing one that already exists. The implications rippled through the group like shockwaves. For centuries, Africa had been carved up by powers that treated its people as resources and its resources as birthright. But now, with the patient precision of ancestors who had once built kingdoms from Timbuktu to Great Zimbabwe, their descendants were preparing to reclaim what had always belonged to them. The timeline? Ibrahim asked. 18 months to final preparation. Coordination begins with seemingly routine diplomatic visits. Nothing that will trigger suspicion. Each leader takes on specific responsibilities based on their strengths and geographic position. The coordinator turned to Ibrahim. Burkina Faso becomes the diplomatic hub. Your revolutionary credentials provide cover for hosting Pan-African Solidarity conferences that are actually operational planning sessions. Togoida, Mali controls the resource mapping. Your engineers will conduct routine surveys that are actually cataloging every asset for the naturalization process. To Tkiani, Niger manages the security architecture. Your military connections provide the framework for continental defense integration. To Malema, South Africa handles the financial infrastructure. Your parliamentary position allows you to prepare the legal mechanisms while your international networks manage the technological deployment. And if we're discovered? Tiani asked. Then we accelerate the timeline and accept the chaos that comes with incomplete preparation, the coordinator replied. But if we succeed, Africa enters the 2030s as an equal partner in global affairs rather than a resource extraction zone. Ibrahim closed his eyes and felt the weight of history pressing down like the hand of every ancestor who had dreamed of this moment. His great-grandfather had fought the French colonial forces with spears and courage. His grandfather had resisted the post-independence puppet governments with protests and patience. His father had challenged the structural adjustment programs with intellect and integrity. And now, in the shadow of a Baobab tree that had watched it all, Ibrahim was being asked to complete what they had started. There's something else, he said, opening his eyes to meet each man's gaze in turn. This isn't just about economics or politics. This is about Sankofa, the Akan principle of learning from the past to move forward. We're not just changing systems, we're healing wounds that have bled for 5 centuries. Past to move forward. We're not just changing systems, we're healing wounds that have bled for 5 centuries. He reached into his grandmother's pouch and withdrew a handful of red earth. My grandmother always said that the ancestors speak through the land. Every grain of soil in this continent carries the memory of what we were before they came, and the promise of what we can become after they leave. Malema nodded slowly. My grandmother told me similar stories. Said the earth remembers every step of every child stolen and sold, every mine dug to feed foreign appetites, every treaty signed under the barrel of foreign guns. Then we understand each other, the coordinator said. This isn't just revolutionary politics, it's restoration. We're not trying to become like them, we're trying to remember how to be ourselves. The conversation continued through the night, moving from broad strategy to specific tactics, from philosophical foundations to practical details. They discussed currency exchange mechanisms and cultural preservation protocols with equal intensity. They planned military exercises and traditional festivals as complementary components of the same grand design. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of gold that reminded Ibrahim of the Burkina Faso flag, they prepared to seal their agreement not with signatures on documents that could be stolen or leaked, but with rituals that bound them to each other and to the land they served. Each man took earth from Ibrahim's pouch and mixed it with soil from their own countries, creating a blend that represented the unity they sought to create. They poured libations for the ancestors, asking for guidance and protection. They spoke prayers in their mother tongues, Moor, Bambara, Hausa, Zulu, creating a chorus of African languages that the Baobab tree accepted like an offering. In 18 months, Ibrahim said as they prepared to leave, When children in Dakar and Dar es Salaam wake up to discover that their continent's wealth belongs to their continent's people, they'll ask how it happened. They'll want to know who made the decision and when and where. He looked around the circle one final time. We'll tell them it was decided by the ancestors, implemented by the living and blessed by the yet unborn. We'll tell them it happened everywhere and nowhere, by everyone and no one. And if they ask for proof? Malima asked. Ibrahim smiled and pressed his palm against the Baobab tree one last time. We'll tell them to ask the trees. The Baobab remembers everything. As the 5 men dispersed into the dawn, each returning to their countries with the weight of Africa's future in their hearts, the ancient tree stood unchanged. Its roots reached deep into soil that held the bones of kingdoms, its branches stretched toward a sky that would soon witness the birth of something unprecedented in human history. The secret meeting was over. The real work was about to begin. Over the following months, the signs were subtle but unmistakable to those who knew how to look. Diplomatic visits increased across the continent, but were always framed as routine regional cooperation. Military exercises expanded in scope and frequency, but always described as routine peacekeeping preparation. Economic conferences multiplied, but always focused on seemingly modest trade facilitation measures. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim hosted a series of Pan-African youth conferences that brought together the continent's brightest technological minds. They arrived thinking they were discussing educational exchange programs. They left with quantum encryption protocols and detailed specifications for the African continental payment system burned into secure drives hidden in traditional leather goods. In Bamako, Goïta's Mineral Resource Sustainability Initiative attracted geologists and mining engineers from across the continent. The public presentations focused on environmental protection. The private sessions mapped every foreign-controlled extraction operation in Africa down to GPS coordinates and security protocols. In Niamey, Tchiani's Sahel Security Cooperation Framework expanded to include military officers from regions far beyond the desert's reach. Training exercises in counterterrorism became rehearsals for coordinated continental defense. Communication systems tests became preparation for synchronized operations across time zones and languages. In Johannesburg, Malima's Economic Justice Parliamentary Network grew to include legislators from 37 countries. Bills ostensibly designed to improve tax collection were actually templates for resource nationalization. Banking regulation discussions were actually deployment strategies for financial independence. The coordinator moved between them all, a shadow figure whose presence was felt but never officially recorded. Intelligence agencies in Washington, London, Paris, and Beijing noticed increased activity but interpreted it through the lens of familiar patterns: regional cooperation, trade facilitation, security coordination. Nothing that hadn't been attempted before, nothing that had ever posed a fundamental threat to established order. They were wrong. 6 months after the Baobab tree meeting, the first major test came when French mining interests in Mali attempted to renegotiate their contracts. Goïta's response was swift and coordinated, with resource decisions in Burkina Faso and Niger that created a unified Sahel mining policy. The message was clear: Africa was learning to speak with one voice. The response from traditional powers was predictable: economic pressure, diplomatic isolation threats, security cooperation withdrawals. But for the first time in post-colonial history, the pressure found no cracks to exploit. Every sanction imposed on one country was cushioned by support from others. Every diplomatic threat was met with continental solidarity. Every economic punishment was absorbed by shared resources and mutual aid. 9 months after the meeting, the African continental payment system went live in beta testing mode. Trade between Nigeria and Ghana, Kenya and Tanzania, Morocco and Senegal began flowing through new channels that bypassed traditional financial oversight. The volumes were small initially, but the infrastructure was sound and the precedent was set. 12 months after the meeting, the first foreign-controlled mine in Africa was nationalized, not through dramatic confrontation, but through legal mechanisms so carefully prepared that international courts found themselves examining bulletproof documentation. Within weeks, similar actions occurred in 17 countries, each justified by different legal frameworks but clearly coordinated in timing and methodology. The global financial media called it the African Spring, comparing it to previous waves of regional change. Intelligence analysts called it unprecedented coordination. Diplomatic circles called it a new phase of resource nationalism. They still didn't understand what they were witnessing. 15 months after the Baobab tree meeting, Ibrahim stood in the same spot where the secret gathering had occurred. The tree looked unchanged, but the continent it watched over was already transforming. In his pocket he carried a prototype of the new African currency. Not a coin or bill, but a quantum-encrypted digital token that represented something far more valuable than money. It represented sovereignty. His phone buzzed with a message from the coordinator: "Final phase authorization in 90 days. All systems operational. Ancestors are proud." Ibrahim smiled and pressed his palm against the baobab's ancient bark. Somewhere in the tree's cellular memory was the record of every empire that had thought itself permanent, every system that had believed itself eternal. The tree had outlasted them all, and it would outlast whatever came next. But this time, for the first time in 5 centuries, what came next would be Africa's choice to make. As he walked back toward Ouagadougou, where a continent's destiny was being quietly rewritten in meeting rooms that looked like conference centers but functioned like liberation command posts, Ibrahim carried with him the certainty that his great-great-grandchildren would know something their ancestors had almost forgotten: what it felt like to be free. The secret meeting under the baobab tree had ended 18 months ago. The African Renaissance was about to begin. In 3 months, when the sun rose on what the history books would later call Liberation Day, children across 54 countries would wake up to discover that their continent's vast wealth, gold from Ghana, diamonds from Botswana, oil from Nigeria, lithium from Zimbabwe, uranium from Niger, copper from Zambia, platinum from South Africa, belonged to Africa's people for the first time since the colonial scramble began. The powers that had carved up the continent in Berlin conference rooms would discover that Africans had learned to plan their own meetings, make their own decisions, and keep their own secrets. And in Burkina Faso, under a baobab tree that remembered everything, the red earth would hold the footprints of the day that changed the world.